Okay everyone, welcome to our last session of today. Today's session is devoted to the topic of ADIS post-2015 and future efforts against illicit financial flows. I'm Laura Byron and I'm a philosopher by training, and I'm very excited to be chairing this panel because it was taxation that first got me interested in philosophy. Who would have thought it? So it's a great pleasure to have our three speakers with us this afternoon. Tom Cardamone is the Managing Director of Global Financial Integrity, and as we heard earlier, was quite influential in getting the issue of illicit financial flows onto various policy agendas. So we're excited to hear from him. Professor Stephen Dean is a Professor of Law at Brooklyn Law School, specialising in tax law. And then finally, Jakob Schwab is an economist and postdoctoral researcher at the Johannes Gutenberg University of Mainz in Germany. So it's a great pleasure to have you with us.
Thank you, Laura, and thank you to Thomas and his team for another wonderful event we've had here for the last 8 years, I think it's been. It's always a pleasure to come and meet people who are so interested in this particular issue. I think, as other people have already mentioned earlier today, about what a good thing it is that illicit financial flows are mentioned in the ADIS action agenda and the Sustainable Development Goals. Leonce said during his presentation that he wouldn't have imagined that would have happened 10 years ago. In the context of ADIS, I wouldn't have guessed it was going to happen in June, to be honest. If you looked at if you paid attention to the debate at the UN between the G77 on one side and US, UK, EU, bank and fund on the other, there was a fundamental disagreement about the definition of illicit financial flows. And the US was arguing for the group that there's no recognized international definition for this. We can't have it in the document. If you can't define it, you can't stop it. If you can't stop it, you can't claim you're going to try to stop it. And that's the way the debate in New York ended before the ADIS discussions. I still don't know what happened in ADIS. I watched that last one online and figured this is not going to happen. That would have been a real problem. But some magic happened in ADIS, and now it is in both the ADIS agreement and the SDGs. It appears modest or innocuous. We commit to substantially reduce illicit financial flows. Basically five words that are matched in both documents. Despite the fact it may appear to be modest, I think it can be a game changer if the pressure is kept on the main financial institutions, the OECD, the bank, the fund, the donor countries, and the developing countries. Just because, I think, again, Leon said this is the beginning. It's a new beginning, but it's things we know how to do. It's things we know what to argue for, to advocate for. I think if you turn that on the whole process that's in these documents on its head and ask the question, what if it didn't happen? We dodged the bullet, I think. We, those of us working on this in the developing countries, dodged the bullet on this. These international conferences on development, the FFD process happens once every 7 years or so. The SDGs once every 15 years. There are no other mechanisms of that sort of weight in the international fora that could have put it in such an important place. So if we miss this year, we would have continued to see 9% annual growth of illicit financial flows, as we've seen over the last 10 years. There would have been nothing in place where you could even begin to reduce that at all. we would have continued to see illicit financial flows that are 100% of ODA and FDI going into the developing countries. This is what the data show. This is the severity of the problem. If we missed this opportunity, we would have been in dire straits, I think. That said, I think we're in quite a good position to begin to look to see what's next. One of those things is what's left of the SDG process is the indicator question. And so there are 17 goals, 169 targets, there are going to be 200 plus indicators, at least one for every target. And it's the way the international community can begin to measure things to give an indication of whether governments are making progress towards particular targets. This process, the UN process, will go on until next March. That's when the final indicators, or the indicators will be finalized, and will be what the tools that will be used between now and 2030 to try to begin to figure out whether things are going in the right direction. As far as target 16.4, and that number has been mentioned earlier today as well, that's where illicit flows, curtailing illicit flows is in the SDGs. That one target has 4 separate indicators that have been at least proposed. The one on illicit flows has been, these have all been coded. It was just a 2-day meeting in Bangkok earlier this week. They've all been coded green, yellow, red, and gray. Green is everybody checks off on. Yellow is more discussion. Gray is we're not quite sure what to do with this, and red is no way, we're not going near this. So the indicator for illicit flows is in the gray zone. Not a whole lot of support. The bank and the fund really don't like this because what it calls for is for the IMF basically to come up with a baseline for every country on a country level basis. What basically to estimate the volume of illicit flows out of every country at the outset. And then to do that every single year for the next 15 years as a way to determine if progress is being made. Essentially what GFI has done, but this would be an IMF, at least the way we're promoting it. It's an IMF responsibility. It's IMF data sets that we use, and it's an IMF methodology that was developed in the 1960s. This is not some new thing GFI thought up in 2006. This is a 50-year methodology that the IMF has used for 50 years. So it's been road tested. It works. The complaints are that the data aren't good enough. And the data are not perfect. The data will never be perfect. They can get better, but we can't let the desire for perfection get in the way of what can be extremely good and extremely helpful. In our view, without an indicator that clearly gives an idea of a country's standing in illicit flows, that 16.4 target is just a hollow set of words that don't mean anything. Because there's no way to determine whether you're making progress or not. So that's the first thing going forward, is trying to get, and we're working quite hard on and trying to get that through. If anybody, I think the key is, we talked about political will today in one form or another. I think political will at the IMF, especially from Christine Lagarde, could go a long way here. If anybody knows Christine Lagarde, call her up and tell her what that indicator should be. Another document that many people don't know about is called the Addis Tax Initiative. And it was a side event, a side agreement that came out of the Financing for Development talks in Addis in July. And it's an agreement among 30 governments and international institutions and Gates Foundation, surprisingly. But Gates is part of this as well. And it's basically an agreement, sort of a coalition of the willing. The donor countries say and commit that they will double the amount of ODA they give to to improve technical capability and capacity building, to help developing countries increase their domestic resources for development. On the other side, the developing countries say they will commit, if they get the money, they will commit sort of the brain power and the political will internally to get those things done. In this document, and it's brief, it's 3 pages, the linkage between illicit financial flows, domestic resource mobilization, and development is clear. So the international community, or a significant piece of the international community, understands and embraces this idea that if you reduce illicit flows, you can get to development, which I think is a key understanding and a key thing that I think is going to, again, one more way to help countries find a way to find political will. So I think that's an extremely important agreement. Now there are 2 components to domestic resource mobilization. One is addressing the compliance gap, as it's known. That is areas where proper laws are in place, compliance of the taxpayer is low. So how do countries address that issue? That's a whole different process than addressing the policy gap. And that is where laws are insufficient and need to be addressed in order to broaden the tax base to drive more domestic resources. As was said earlier today, ODA is not going to get this done. SDGs won't be achieved because of foreign aid. They're going to be achieved because of a combination of foreign aid, investment in greatly enhanced domestic resources. So how do you address the compliance gap? Well, there's the capacity building and technical capability that the Addis Tax Initiative is talking about to really address tax evasion, and that's the key to that component. On the policy gap side, you have to look at the tax code and various customs regulations and ask the question: does this country even have a law against trade misinvoicing? If they don't have a law against trade misinvoicing, that's a perfect place to start. Do they have laws about, or do they include in their contracts with extractive industries that there will be a clearly identified way to determine the amount of product coming out of the ground and the amount of product going to the port? In many places, this is a real challenge. Nigeria, for instance, there are no volume counters at the wellhead, and there are none at the port. The government has no idea what's coming out of the ground, and they don't know how much is going on the ships, except what the companies tell them they're pumping and putting on the ship. It's a problem, and if it's happening in Nigeria, I'm sure it's happening in many other places where extractors are a key part of developing country economies. And another sort of just very simple policy gap thing, is there a tax on luxury goods? I mean, these are very simple, sort of low-hanging fruit things that really have to be looked at and examined to try to help countries drive more revenue. Now, GFI is, part of this will go to Esther's questions in the previous panel. GFI has come up with a 3-step process where we are beginning to engage in depth with developing country governments to try to provide to them the tools needed for implementation and achievement of the targets in the SDGs. The first is an in-depth analysis of their illicit flows problem and their illicit flows history. We have just last month published an analysis of illicit flows out of Myanmar. And it's a 54-year study. It's a multi-decade study. And you can see the ebbs and flows of illicit money coming out of the country. How much is it due to leakages from the balance of payments? How much is it due to trade misinvoicing? Without doing this deep analysis, you have no idea where to go next. You don't really have a grasp of the intricacies of a particular country's illicit flow problem. One of the things we've learned over a number of years we've been doing these studies is the things that drive illicit flows in country A are not necessarily the same things that drive illicit flows in country B. The economies are different, the political systems are different. Some have extractive resources, others don't. Sometimes there's massive amount of illicit money flowing into the country because they have a narcotics problem, and it's illicit money going back into the economy to continue to drive that illicit activity. So unless you do these long, in-depth studies, you really have no idea what you're dealing with in any particular place. So that's the first. The second is a lengthy engagement with key departments in the developing country. The first thing we will do if we get the buy-in from the country is request from them their tax code, their banking regulations, their customs regulations, and the attorneys on our staff will go through with a fine-tooth comb and try to determine the things I was talking a little bit earlier. Do they have laws against trade misinvoicing? What's their banking regulation like? What do they do with PEPs? And we found in a recent study that one country has laws on PEPs, but foreign PEPs, a politically exposed person. Sorry. So if you have a government position, high-level government position, or you're a family member of a high-level government official, any banking activity you have should go under a special review. So this country has a law on politically exposed persons, but foreigners, not ones in their own country. So it's a bit of a problem. There's kind of a gap there. So one of our recommendations should probably fill this gap. It might be eye-opening what you find if you put them under greater scrutiny. Once we do that, we invite key government officials high-level government officials from key ministries, central bank, finance ministry, the FIU, customs, tax, and we get them in a room for 2 days in Washington. And we talk about what we found, going through their tax code, their customs and banking regulations, and begin a dialogue. We tell them what we found, why we think it's an issue. We make specific recommendations to them on how they can address those particular areas of concern. And then we listen. These are the folks that do this work every day in and day out, on the ground. They have a view of this we would never get. And without talking to them and trying to figure out from them what they see their problems to be, without that, we don't get a real, full, deep idea of what's going on in that particular country. And it's amazing to sit back in these meetings and listen to the different departments from the country talk to one another. You probably haven't had some of these conversations in your own country, and they have them in Washington with us. It's a real way to get a whole of government mindset, to create this political will. It's just absolutely an imperative before any progress is going to be made. Once we do that, 2 days, they go back to their home country. We put together a synopsis of what we talked about for 2 days, send it to them. 3-4 months later, we will go visit that country. Find out, what do you think of the recommendations? Are they being implemented? Are there people in the government we should talk to? Where are you finding roadblocks? Is there anything we can do to help facilitate the discussion in your country to get this stuff done? So it's a sort of a consulting process. It's a collaborative process. We are trying to be as helpful as possible, given the expertise we have, to help them get them where they need to go and they want to go. So that's the second part of the 3 steps. And the third one has to do with customs. Esther asked about trade misinvoicing and customs. We are now developing a global trade pricing database that we will make available to any developing country customs department that wants it. A database that includes global average prices for 25,000 different products that's searchable by either the code that's attached to each product. Every product in the world has a unique code. Or by, they can also search it by the name, plastic water bottle. So they will be able to tell in real time if a similar product being imported or exported from their country is priced above or below the 6-month average for that same product. Or within an acceptable range of the average. This isn't being used anywhere. It's a simply, it's easily implemented, it's simple to train, but it can give the customs departments the information it does not now have. Our data show that of the $1 trillion in illicit money that flows out of developing countries each year, 730, at least this is in the last year we studied, 730 billion goes through the customs department. So before the goods ever leave the port, they can identify whether it's been priced in a way that they might not know in the first instance, whether it's misinvoiced on purpose or whether there's a particular reason, but at least they have the opportunity to ask questions of the importer or the exporter. They can do an investigation, they can open the container if they think they need to, but it puts power in their hands that they don't now have. The phrase domestic resource mobilization, we focus on the word mobilization. Governments can only mobilize resources they capture. They can only capture resources they can see. And they're not seeing $730 billion in trade invoicing every year. So this is what we believe to be a practical, low-cost, high return on investment product that can hopefully really begin to help countries reduce their illicit flows in a significant way going forward. So that's sort of the overview of where I see things that need to be done going forward. Lots of opportunity, and I look forward to your questions. Thanks.
So, thanks everybody for your patience and attention in advance. I know two things. I'm a tax lawyer, and it's 4 something in the afternoon, which is a dangerous combination. When my son was very young, my wife had a terrible time sleeping, and one of the best ways of helping her get to sleep, I'm not making this up, was telling her what I did that day. So, just warning you, I try to not put you all to sleep. It's very, very useful. All right, so I'm talking about the future of tax havens, and I want to start by talking about what I'm not talking about. And some of this is going to be obvious, but bear with me. Obviously, I'm talking about tax evasion. I'm not talking about particularly offshore tax evasion. I'm not talking about money laundering. Certainly, when you're talking about tax evasion by residents of high-income countries, it's kind of the opposite. Money's soiling. It's clean money that's being made dirty by hiding it. So that's definitely something separate that I'm not talking about. And what I'm really focusing on here is why, as a technical matter, tax havens exist. Right? So why, as a technical matter, do tax havens exist? And there are a number of ways to come at that question. One way to start is, well, because we have an income tax, right? If we didn't have an income tax, you wouldn't have the same problem. There's a lively debate among tax scholars, at least, whether an income tax is even a good idea. But if you want to start at that place, you can start at that place. I don't think it's fruitful to start here today, but that's one of the kinds of questions you can ask. But I do think that it's important to keep in mind that offshore tax evasion is not a question of individual moral failure or anything along those lines. It's really a structural flaw inherent in the international tax regime. And I'll explain what I mean by that. And just to put it a slightly different way, so there are a variety of reasons that extraterritorial tax information is difficult to come by. And one thing to keep in mind is that even if tax havens didn't exist, it would still, tax evasion related to a lack of what I call ETI would still be a problem. All right, so where do I start? Some of you will remember this, but some of you won't. In 1996, Newsweek had this great article, great or terrible or both, article on beauty, the science of beauty. And they explained quite helpfully that beautiful people, weren't anything other than symmetrical. Does everybody remember this story? It was really hilarious. So Denzel Washington, they measured it all, it was very symmetrical. That's what. And I'm not making this up. They put it out that I love it is very unsymmetrical, and that's why he's unattractive. Newsweek. This is news. Newsweek told us this, so you make of that what you will. So what does it have to do with offshore tax evasion and the sources of it? I did tell you it was 4 in the afternoon. I'm a tax lawyer, so I'm trying hard to not lose sleep. But bring it back to offshore tax evasion and the sort of the role that symmetry plays in making this problem real. You can go all the way back to, you can take it further back, but the 1927 Convention on Administrative Assistance in Matters of Taxation. So this was the League of Nations, that far back, League of Nations. They had a committee of technical experts. Some of you will recognize the term the four economists. I know others will too. These are the economists that got together to try to work out the basics of international tax cooperation, and they put out 4 different model treaties. They were eventually collapsed into one, the double tax treaties that we know today. But they started out with 4, and they had. The way they worked it out, they wanted it. They explained why they wanted these to be bilateral because they wanted it to be about a quid pro quo, not about a sort of a supranational government. They wanted it to be an exchange that way. And once you start out with that premise, you have some good, right? So the good news is that there are thousands of bilateral double tax treaties that have been called a miracle. In the way that they promote cooperation and form the backbone of this regime. And they're also good because